So yeah, we are live on Facebook right now. I'm so glad to be seeing a lot of family, friends, people I've met in official capacities. Some people are Tessa's friends that have become my friends. It's a whole shebang. But I just wanted to introduce why we do this, what this is. So this is Success versus Greatness. It's a Facebook Live series that my team at Engage, Inspire, and Empower have done since May last year, and it's a one-year project we're working on. And we said, let's look for people that are of Ugandan descent that live around the world and let them share to the rest of the world what success looks like for us and what greatness looks like, but also just their stories, their lives. And we're looking at this as a way to see people that look like us and have shared experiences with us tell us about these topics. It's cool when you watch it on TED Talks and all of that, but when you see somebody that can totally relate with you, it's different. And so that's why we do this. I have an amazing, amazing team that works with me. Um, Francis Mumba, who has my last name, yes, we are siblings, does all my communications. Pauline Nalubega does all the logistics. Doreen Suvi does all of my strategy, and then my creative director is Wilson Chisambira. So they are either on Facebook Live or on this call, and I'm appreciative of all of them. But let's get to the woman of the hour, Tessa. I am so glad to have you. It's it's been like months of planning, and finally you're here, and I'm just so grateful that you were able to do this. So just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about Tessa? Let's start there.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Nisha. I just adore you. We've been wanting to for a long time. I'm so honored to be here, and your whole beautiful team. It's just so inspiring to have women like you guys that are telling stories, that are leading the way. So I feel very honored to even be associated with words like greatness and success. So I'm just proud of you guys. Yeah,
Yeah.
my name. I can start off a little bit. Yeah, my name is Tessa. Both my parents were born in Uganda, in Jinja. But they actually didn't meet each other until they came to the United States. So, um, yeah, my I where should I start? Should I start with what did
I
you ask
actually
about?
feel like the one
What to
place that I would love for you to start is, let's start to like before Tessa becomes the person we know today. Let's go to the younger Tessa. How was that, right? Two immigrant parents
Yes,
in the Midwest, I'm pretty sure is where you grew up, unless I'm wrong.
yes.
So walk us through what that experience looked like for you, a woman of color born to two immigrants in the Midwest, which doesn't really look like, the diverse Boston City or New York or San Francisco. So walk us through there. Let's start around there.
Perfect. Okay, I love it. So yes, I was born in Michigan, just a little bit outside of Detroit. Both of my parents had come here in the early '70s. So yeah, my mom's grandfather was in national politics. So
Yeah.
yeah. So the story how she got here is really rooted in that because he was one of the members who was a drafter of Uganda's constitution, and then a year later was part of the first cabinet of Obote before things went so crazy and terrible as everyone knows. He and other members of the cabinet were incarcerated for 5 years and then fled to Kenya and then to the UK. Um, and in that time, my mom also left after when she was ready to go to college. So she first went to school in Paris, and then she came to the United States to the Midwest because yeah, where and a lot at that time, especially now still, but Minnesota had really welcoming policies for immigrants, especially African immigrants. So they had a lot of friends and family friends who were able to receive scholarships. And the school just had a really great program to welcome international students. So that's how the Midwest happened. And then, so she was based in Ginger, but just a couple miles down the road, which she had no idea of. Her future husband was growing up there too in a small village called Kitengasa. I don't know if anyone knows it. And he grew up within a completely different life. Grew up on a farm with his family, and until he went to college, like had never had electricity. Came from a really big family. He's the first one. His family to graduate from high school. And now, but he was able to, so really through education, which is a big part of my story and what cut into my childhood, is
Right.
like really based on how I was raised. So he, now has 5 degrees, and he is, has had the opportunity, most of all, now that he's like kind of mid-retirement, to do a lot of work to give back to Uganda. So most of the work that he does is now in Uganda, supporting farmers and women and communities like the ones in which he grew up. So I think, and then they both came here at the same time, and their friends set them up. At first, my mom, her friends said, "Oh, I know this other guy from Uganda. You guys have to meet each other." And she's like, "No, I'm in the U.S. I don't want to date a Uganda guy. Why am I here?"
Of course.
And
Story of my life. Story of my life. Wow.
Everyone's always trying to set you up. She had just gotten here.
Yeah.
But they always say after 9 days, they knew they were going to get married. So I guess it was meant to be. And then the rest is history. But I think based on that, they really, from there, because of job opportunities, they moved to a neighboring state. So Minnesota and Michigan are very close together. And we really did not grow up around a lot of Ugandans in our hometown. And so what they did is try to infuse all the beautiful things about Ugandan culture, right? Every Sunday we were making chapatis, we would sing Ugandan songs, we would have all the ways that we could. They would host, kind of do what others did for them. They helped to start a scholarship program for East African students in general. So a lot of times, like, we would have people staying with us, we'd be hosting students maybe at our Thanksgivings and Christmases and things like that. And we have other family in the US, a lot of other family in the US, but mainly like New York, New Jersey area, or Florida, or still Minnesota. So we would try to, it was hard when we were younger because they were just starting their career, so there wasn't as much money. But the times that we could, we would pack up the car and drive across the U.S. to visit all of our other Ugandan relatives and friends, Ugandan friends who we still call aunties and sengas and everything like that. So
I'm telling you, the one thing that my friends to today say, they're just like Ugandans. Everyone is their sister, brother, cousin, aunt, uncle.
Exactly.
But that's the beauty of it.
Why do my cousins and I always say that it was like we had to be at least teens when some of us were alerted to the fact, oh, we're not actually cousins.
It hits you.
I was disappointed. I'm like, dang. I was like, I thought I had more. I mean, I do still have a lot of cousins, but that's the beauty of it, though. Like, the family, like all of my cousins and those I call cousins, always felt like family. So I think growing up in the household, it was really focused. It was really focused on love. They just wanted to have a household that was welcoming of all people. So much of the learning I did, I felt like, was at the dinner table. I'm the youngest in my family. So I feel like I just had the opportunity just to soak up for my brother and my sister, my parents, and everyone that they would have. They used to love to host. So we'd have people from all over just telling stories and dropping knowledge and just being, I think that was like the best education I ever received. Education now was so important, but it wasn't like you have to do this and that. They would always just find fun ways. Like, I remember, like, when we'd have those road trips, we would make up songs to practice, like, the mathematication, the multiplication tables, like 2 times 2 is what, and they would always, my dad always had something, like, he tries to be very frugal, but he was always like, if you ever want a book, any book in the world, I'll always buy it for you, and I'll put that exact same amount in the savings account for you for college. So that was like a really cool way just to, like, encourage us to be curious, and like to spend money on things that could enrich. So just a lot of that. And my parents really loves to dance, so I feel like our household was always just full with music and that kind of stuff. But so education was a really big force, but in its informal ways and formal ways, right? We would, like, read together and watch documentaries and movies and just try to have a lot of different experiences. Just even in the community, the way in which, like, at the time when it was no longer COVID, we lived right by campus.
Yeah.
the campus housing, so right near the campus housing. So they would always take us to the free plays or the free this and other free sports things, and just to get exposure to like many different other types of cultures. And both my parents were very, very, very politically active.
Right.
And they're really big in terms of civic engagement. So even before they became citizens, I still remember I was 4, but even before that, they would always volunteer on campaigns. They would take us with them to the voting booth to every single election, whether it was a local election, whether it was school board or voting on one little measure. And the first thing they would do, because back then, of course, it wasn't online, so they would send you all the information ahead of time in paper, and we would go through, and my mom would explain what they mean, and we'd highlight, like, okay, so we're going to vote on this, and then why this matters is because of that. And she would use language that was appropriate for our ages, so she would just boil it down, but it was just so cool. We're like, oh, cool. And so it was kind of like election day became like our Super Bowl, we're like, oh, which one's won and who won, which candidate, So it would just be a fun way to understand like the power of like your voice and the ways in which even in little ways you can create change. So even though we couldn't vote, we felt like we were part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit about the childhood.
Right. And the one thing that I hear from you, and I think we connect on this level because my dad knows your parents, and the one thing he always says, and I don't take this for granted, he always says that their generation was almost like they live for us. Like he always says that. It's like they live to give us knowledge, to give us understanding, to give us exposure. Like all the things you were saying, like going to plays, going to those sports events, going the election, those are all things that when I think back as well to like fact that I do have 2 immigrant parents, they always pick those little small things about the culture that they want you to be active about and teach you every single step. And they're like, like this is, my mom, like after we elected this past election, she was like, so who did you, like what was number 2? What was number 3? Because I never, for people who don't know, when you're electing in the US, sure, it's fun when you see number 1, but there's 2, 3, 4, and 5, and like they're all like big issues that apply in your community. So one, I'm glad that you brought that up, but then that takes me to, can you talk to me about what difference did it make being born to 2 immigrant parents, but well-educated and highly educated immigrant parents? Do you think that made a difference when it came to you moving not only to high school, but even college, like those decisions that you made? What role did that, the fact that your parents were both educated and highly educated, what role did that play in your choices for colleges, how you experienced high school and college?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking, Patricia. And our parents are so similar. But it absolutely played a big role. So both of my parents worked at the universities for their entire careers, and my dad still does. So I think that was absolutely a driving factor, just in terms of one, like when you're little, you don't really know what college is or like why it's important or what's it going to bring. And especially so many, at least of our family members from Uganda, never had the chance to go to college. And so it's kind of hard to understand what that even looks like or how one even can achieve something like that. And then what happens afterwards. So I felt like they were able to break that down in a lot of ways, and I think it was like less about telling. I can't remember one time when my parents like, you have to go to college. I don't remember anything like that, but I think I saw the power of it by virtue of them showing things. For example, my dad used to go to a lot of conferences all around the world, and they used to be the case, I don't think it's true anymore. If you're like, I think it was like if you're under 4, you could either be free or like half off on airline travel. So we would be able to go and travel with him and all sleep in one little hotel room, sometimes 1 or 2 beds, but just to be exposed, right? And so we would be in these places where they were college students or professors that were sharing ideas that we hadn't heard of, or things like that. And so I think it was just understanding, and my mom worked as an advisor to students and worked with a lot of the international programs and scholarships. And so I think it was just like, it was important. It was a really good introduction to what this could bring. And what I think they did really well was not, it was never this idea of where you go, or even if you go to college is an end all, but if it's your choice and if you have the opportunity, it could bring you these things. So I thought that was really like a good way just to get exposure. And so they would just expose us to by virtue of where we lived and what they did. I feel like it was such a beautiful and graceful opportunity to just understand. But most of all, I think what it did was, and I see the threads of that in my siblings and myself as well, it wasn't only just like to encourage us to get an education, but for each of us to go out in our own ways to find opportunities to help other people receive an education, whether it be formal, informal, college or not. Just the idea of exposure and experience, and ways in which just to learn, period, in whatever way or shape or form that manifests itself, is just so powerful. And it can be really soul shifting and like groundbreaking, and can really lead to a lot of different perspectives, and you can find joy and love and things that you never imagined. So I think just like, I'm just always trying to find ways at people of any age, from wherever they are, to be able to find different ways in which to connect with people and ideas that I have not expected. Because I think it's really powerful what can happen when you bring people together and you infuse learning. So I think having them just being people that are always curious, always want to know more, that I always want to so I think that I feel like I almost experienced that before I even really understood like what they did at the university. I knew that they loved to learn. I knew that, especially because they were new to the United States, they didn't really know the systems and the structures and how things operated. And we didn't really have folks from Uganda in our hometown to kind of like help navigate. So yeah, like it was just like kind of try to learn on the fly. And so I saw that aspect of learning. And so I think if anything, like just that self-education is just as powerful as a formal one. So I think just coming from parents that really valued and just get a lot of joy and happiness from learning is something that I carry in my heart.
Right. I couldn't relate more on that, because as you said, I've never, and I count this as a huge blessing, in that even when I was going to college, it was never about, if you don't go, your life is over. It was never about, you better go for me. And that's one of the biggest privileges I think that I've had in my life, is the fact that I had parents who told me, this is the value of what you could get if you cross this bridge. Whether you cross it or not is your choice. But we're just letting you know this is what's on the other side. The fact that I actively made that choice versus them kind of pushing, I think it just made me more interested, and it made me, I guess, curious to figure out, like, what is that thing they're talking about on the other end? Like, it must be valuable if they're talking about it today. But then education for me, I think, I always tell, whenever I talk to high schoolers, and I still go back to my high schools today and mentor, and whenever I talk to them, a lot of people say, I hear this statement, formal education, like, shouldn't be, it's not essential, right? It's not make or break. And I always say, it's not essential, it's not make or break for who? Because that's a huge thing to deal with, huge thing, right? Because I look at, for my mom, like, from where she went to school to where I went to school, the difference is like, what I'm doing right now is her wildest dreams in life. Like, she never would have dreamt of doing all her classes online. What? On which line? On which computer? On which internet? Was internet a thing when she wasn't, like, it's all these things that are so mind-blowing for her. But I really like to get into that conversation about formal education and who it's essential for and who it's not. Because for me, I always say, education changed the direction of my entire family, hands down. we never would have been where we are if we did not pursue education at the levels that we did. So walk me through when you think formal education, essential or not essential, what comes to mind? What does it make you think about? How, just break it down for me when you think of that statement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think especially when it comes to, and I'm just going to call it out, especially when it comes to Black women and immigrant women. Unfortunately, we know that the data is true. We know that, we know that unfortunately, we are the least paid, but the most educated.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Black women in the United States are the most educated body of all demographics, no matter how you slice it and dice it, no matter what combinations you put together, the most educated, but the least paid. So I know I had conversations with my mom about just that. And that wasn't really, even if I'm sure obviously that data was still true then, but that wasn't a driver. But I think since we've had so many conversations around now, it's in order to just tread water, it almost feels like if you're a person in one of these demographics, that we almost have to be in some way, however way you're educated, you have to have something behind your name. Unfortunately, It's not enough. Something that made me a statistic that made me so sad was that white male high school dropouts, average salary across the US is higher than master's degree Black women. And that just makes you so sad to there's just a lot, there's lots to unpack there, right? There's like a lot to unpack there. So it's not even, some of these things are even bigger than who we are. So, I mean, I hope that we love the idea of education itself, but some of these things are just really practical, like in order to be taken seriously sometimes, and maybe those spaces where that's true, we shouldn't even be in, but for some, but for in some ways, it almost feels as though that's the case. And hopefully things will start to change. We have a refreshed administration and all of that. These things will sometimes take generations to transform. But what I do know to be true is that that's one way I feel like, especially for immigrant women and Black women in the United States, has been a powerful force to try to reverse some of those cycles and those stigmas and the understanding of and the devaluation of all of that. So I hope that, I wish it weren't true, but I know that it's a reality. And then I would love to say what to your point about, I loved what you said about your parents never required touch but encouraged it. So I was waiting for a time to share this story, which I love, which is the reason why we know each other. It's so, to me, it gives me chills down my spine. So for folks who don't know, this must have been about a year and a half ago. It was a year and a half ago. I was in Boston, and I was coming back from somewhere in the moment when I would have usually taken the train back, but it had started raining suddenly, and it was I didn't have an umbrella, so I was I'm gonna call an Uber. I was I felt I don't want to waste the money, but okay, I just decided to do it. I was I could just put over a bag or something, but I was no, let's just call an Uber. Who cares? So I call an Uber, and this really nice man is driving, and and we start talking, and are you from Uganda? And he says, how do you know? Literally is a whip around. And we start talking and start diving in. And all of a sudden we realize that we know all the same people, that we come from the exact same spaces. And we are singing, we did a video together, and I go and we get to my apartment. The ride actually wasn't that long. So we're literally just talking there before I go, and my whole family, extended family, has a WhatsApp group. And I'm sharing with everyone, and everyone is saying, oh my gosh, I love this man. Oh, how could you? Oh my gosh, I cannot believe you met him. He's amazing. And in that conversation, one of the reasons that we really connected, besides the Uganda connection, was
Right.
he kept saying, "You remind me of my daughter. No, what did you study in college?" And I studied architecture. She did too. No, and she went to Cornell and she said this and that. And this was like, there were just so many things. I was like, boom, boom, boom. And that man
Yeah.
is Patricia's father. And
Yeah.
that's how we got connected. And he sent me her, was it first your LinkedIn? I don't remember the first
Yeah. It
way
was
to
either
connect,
LinkedIn or
whether
something.
your number or your
Yeah.
Facebook. Somehow, I don't remember how we ended up connecting, but one of those
Hmm.
through some way he gave me an opportunity to connect to, and we have just been like soul sisters since. And so it just, yeah, it's just like I love it. Just things like that that just remind you of like the power of conversation,
Hmm.
and just you notice a heart as soon as you meet somebody. And it was so clear to me. I was like, I know I'm connected to this man in some way. I'm like, even if he says he's from Kenya, I don't know, there's something there. You know,
Hmm.
I'm like, I think he's from Uganda, but if he's not, there's something. And then they were just like boom, boom, boom. My uncle
Right.
Zonda, he like went to
Yeah.
school, like just like a million things, you know, like it's just like so cool. So I just wanted to say that, but especially back to the question of education. Was just so proud of you. Like, oh, I have to tell you, she did this at Cornell. I remember like literally sitting in the car when I was like, and it was just like the radiance that came, like you could just feel the pride, like from like
Mm.
deep in the soul. And it was just like so cool to hear. It's always so cool, but especially in this case, to hear
Yeah.
there's like the pride for a daughter. But it wasn't about the name of the school. It was just
Mm.
about you doing something that meant a lot to you, and
Yeah.
that was challenging, and you persisted, and that you had like found so much success in many different ways. So I just thought that was like a really good example of the ways in which yeah, your parents have valued education, but then
Right.
also honored your space and the ways in which that you wanted to approach it.
Yeah, 100%. Also, he's on the call, so he's totally like, he must be beaming wherever he is. He's just like, I mean, he came home the day he met you. I was, I think I was in upstate, I'm pretty sure. And he came on and was like, I need to tell you, I met this person. And I'm just like, Dad, okay, I get it. Let's take it one step at a time. Like, explain who this person is. But, at the end of it all, when he just described your interaction and what happened and how he's like, I know her parents, and it was like, oh, Uganda has come to the US and everything is adding up. But the thing that he kept on telling me was, this is why you work so hard and make sure your kids are in the right spaces so that
uh,
you can make these connections. And that, as you said, like, he was just like, if she had never said she went to school for architecture, then I wouldn't have told her about you who went to school for architecture. But on that same point, let's dive into this Ivy League beautiful thing that is another thing that connects us. I think for me, my 5 years in the Ivy League opened me up to a side of my identity that I never knew existed. I'll tell you that. So I don't like to say challenges because honestly, Cornell gave me the world and so much more. I mean, I'm low key, I can go to any of the 50 states in the US and I know one person. So that would have never happened if it wasn't for Cornell. But, what were those nuanced experiences you had in the Ivy League? Because even if we want to say that the college experience is the same and it doesn't matter where you go, when you go to the Ivy League, you will meet the top of the top and you will be challenged and you will be pushed and you will react to things and you will be opened, your eyes will be open to a lot of issues, but also you'll learn a lot about yourself. The
yeah.
strength that you never knew you had,
Yes.
space that you never knew you could walk into. Because guess what? I always tell people, Patricia before Cornell and Patricia after Cornell, there's a lot more doors I can open because of that step that I never would have. Not because I got the degree from Cornell, but because of the quality of education I got at Cornell. That just made me that, different person. So you walk me through those nuanced experiences of the Ivy League, and let people know which, you know, she didn't go to Cornell with me. Everyone's worried. She'll let you know where she went.
You're worried. You're so sweet. Yeah, so I'll tell you. So I went to undergrad at Princeton University. And then 10 years later, I went to graduate school at Harvard University, where I work now. So my experiences were, girl, every up and down, especially undergrad, I think at Princeton. I loved it. I did love it, but I don't think, but there were still some things that were really, really, I think there were things that were challenging as well. I think I was more ready and more prepped for an experience like that when I went to graduate school. Undergrad, I mean, I was just like, well, in the first part, which is like, I was so excited to go to college, and like Princeton just provides such an incredible undergraduate experience. Well, one thing that people really don't know. So when we say Ivy League, you think, oh, so Princeton has no loans. So if you have financial aid, that's awarded to you in grant form. So that to me was like really powerful, because what that meant is it allowed a lot of folks that wouldn't be able to afford a school like that. So I liked the Princeton. So it was kind of like, for me, it felt like the best of both worlds. Because it was like getting this amazing education, but my parents also had to do financial aid. And so but it didn't fall on them or on me. And so they have a really, so anytime, like when people, you know, all these schools have all these huge endowments and donations, but they have a really strong cue that when people donate, the first place where they can do it is to what they call the alumni giving. And that goes into the financial aid pot. And instead of like just going to some fancy building or some fancy that, the first place that it funnels to is that. So I love that mission. So that's one of the reasons why I liked that idea of education. I was like, well, this is a good opportunity where like my parents don't have to use up all their savings, and I can get an education. And it's one of the smaller Ivy League schools, and everyone lives on campus for all 4 years. So it's like a very, and I learned so much. Like, even though it's small, you meet people from everywhere, from countries I had only read, I don't even know how to pronounce, from communities in the US that I didn't know, and had some exposure to some of the folks who've become mentors of mine throughout my life, you know. For example, you know, one of I took classes with Toni Morrison, with Cornell West, right? Those became literally my mentors. They became, we would have real lunch and conversations and office hour, you know? So it's like, I mean, and so many other people would too. I mean, I just happened to be in their class. I was just this like really shy girl that like would stutter, but like be so excited. So it's like, it's just like the access to a space like that. And it's not that you have to talk to these people directly to be impacted by them. Absolutely not. But I think I learned as much from my fellow students and dorm mates than I did from everyone, from the professors actually. And not to downplay in any way, but I think it's just like it's like this social experiment where you have like people from so many walks of life, and from so many countries and communities, that it was really rich, to be able to just like listen and learn from so many folks that have had different experiences from mine, and to share the experience of Uganda with so many people, and to meet other people from East Africa. I think it was great because since I came from a small town in Michigan, I didn't have that experience at like my high school, my middle school. So it was really cool to just be able to be around other people and just like really like learn about what their experience on earth has been like so far, and then complement that with the classes that we were taking, with people who I still look up to. A negative I would say is, so Princeton University is in New Jersey, which is a little bit less than an hour from New York. So there is also a lot of, so there's the positives, and then there are some of the negatives where there's a lot of like just the like rich New York, spoiled right-wing class.
Say that again. Say that again, louder, please.
Yeah, it was really hard for me. Like, I'm unapologetically a Democrat, I'm liberal. I support progressive causes. And so for me, it was sometimes hard because, so one of the first parties, I will say this, I went to at Princeton, and I heard this guy his last name is Rockefeller, not by coincidence, because he is a descendant.
He is a Rockefeller, yeah.
And there was like some altercation between like him and another guy. I didn't really understand what's going on, but everyone could, I saw what was going on, but I didn't know the history. And he said something like, millionaires acting like billionaires. And I was like, is this the place for me? Like, I'm like, I don't even know how much money I have in my checking account. Yeah. And like, he's like, it's just like, so, but then, I mean, but that's a small slice. So there are people, but like, I'm glad I experienced that early on. That was my first time hearing something like that. That was my first time ever seeing anyone do cocaine. So when people say that Black people do drugs and white people are innocent, it was at that party. But it was good to experience, not good, but it was productive and helpful to experience that. Because then for the rest of my career, that was when you had like the welcome week. I knew that those are not my people. And it's too bad that people like you exist here. At Princeton, but I found my way. I found so many powerful spaces. I did dance while I was in college. I was part of political groups and community groups. I worked in so many ways in the neighboring areas in Trenton and Camden, working with students, working with adults looking for jobs, trying to understand like how we kind of like bridge the gap between campus and community. A lot with student government, like made lifelong friends, all that kind of stuff. So I think both things existed and both things are true, but it took like maybe like a couple of weeks to find my tribe. And like, you always would know that there are people like that, but there also were really good people that I think had worked their whole life, and their families and grandparents had imagined this, as you said, their ancestors had imagined this for them for their whole life. So it was good to be in a space that allowed for people, regardless of where their families stand financially, to be able to access an education like that.
Right, no, 1,000%. The bittersweet truth of the Ivy League is it cuts across the US. It gives you a good, quick study of all the levels, classes, races, nationality, everything in one space. So if you didn't know one side of something, you're about to find out when you get there. So let's get into how do you move from someone that went to school for architecture, which I did too, and then I'm totally educating right now, and people are just like, why did you take 5 years in architecture and then switch to educating? But guess what? Tessa is here to validate all my points because she went to school for architecture and she's in policy writing. So, my point is, I've always said that I don't regret a single day that I walked into an architecture classroom. I still design today. Love the architectural sensibilities. But if there is something that I learned from that kind of education, is all the little small things that make up who you are. Because a designer is multifaceted. That's just what it is. But as you said, like things like, what's your impact in the community? How can what you make bring something or take something away? How to ask the difficult questions, how to make a problem and then solve it. Those are all things I learned in architecture school, right? So see, I was listening, So here's my thing. How did you, if even was it, because for me it was a very easy decision for me to go into educating, specifically design thinking educating. But how was that process for switching? I don't think you have to justify what you do when you're done with college, but if you went to school for architecture and then switch to something different, how did you make that transition? One, and from there, let's walk into how you got from architecture degree to the Tessa who's politically active and trying to change the world and everything in between.
Well, I hope that and things will one day be true. Thank you so much, love. Yeah, first of all, I validate, and like, I feel like anyone who's been through architecture, we need like a badge or a stamp or something, because it's no joke, but thank you so much. So my experience was such, so actually when I went into undergrad, I was debating between majoring in architecture or majoring in politics.
Mm.
But I felt like architecture, I was like, well, one, it's like, it's interesting, it's fun, it's creative, maybe it's more technical, give me an edge. But I didn't really know, I didn't know anything about architecture. We didn't have, some high schools have architecture, we did not at all. I had just always loved being artistic and thinking and things in that way. So I really didn't know exactly what I was getting myself into. So I was going between different classes and trying to understand what I wanted to do. We didn't have to declare our major until the second year. So the first year you
Yeah.
can find your way. But I took and my life changed when I took an architecture studio, an architecture course that was in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. So this was in 2003, and
Mm.
immediately had to think about the social, the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, um, that devastated so many homes and communities in the U.S. and still to this day, I think is the most destructive hurricane that's happened like in our generation.
Right.
So so immediately we had to think about the social, the political, and the economic. And through that course, we went down to New Orleans and were able to, and we met with officials, and our task was really to like design emergency housing,
Mm-hmm.
for folks whose homes had been devastated for them to live in. So it was really a design task, but what I learned from it was so much more than design. And what I gathered was like, there are so many issues. So it wasn't even just the hurricane, but like the areas that were devastated and there were just so much going on in terms of like the structures and how this worked and how we serve people. And the communities that had not been served for so long were the ones that
Mm-hmm.
were hurt. And how is this all going to play out financially and policy and a long-term vision? And there were just so many things around, the kids, the families, of this. It became much more in my heart, and for my my classmates too, much more about design. So like, yeah, we can tell you the shape we think you should do, but like that's not really
Right.
so
Yeah.
I think from then on, I wanted to understand how to use design as a problem solving device,
Yeah.
as a lens by which to understand ways in which to create better spaces, but also better systems and structures. And
Yeah.
so so after that, the summer following, I actually did my first work in political activism. I was on this is so long ago. I'm gonna date. You guys are also like young and beautiful. Like I'm so much older, but I was on the original team of Barack Obama's Senate race in 2004. So that was like way before. So our first meeting was in a garage. Like that's how like no one knew him. He was shy and skinny and just like didn't. No one thought like this is how are we going to win this thing? But I think that all the skills and the tools. It sounds wild, but some of the skills and the tools that we use in terms of like urban planning and architecture, understanding people and space and impact, were really valuable. Even just the trajectory of like taking an idea, thinking about how to implement it, and then understanding what the impact could be.
Yeah.
Where they're just like lessons and understanding there, and also understanding a city. Like one of the first things I did, and it sounds so small, but one of the first things I did because he and the team were like, we have to understand like our strategy. And I was like, well, the first thing we should do is just like map out like where the people or communities that we want. And it sounds like a silly thing now because we have like maps on the internet, but like back then it was, oh wow, so like we literally had like a printed out map. You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay, so these are the places where we can, and just like, so I think design has like always been, and so it's like because so much of it shouldn't be this way, but so much of politics is about you have to win a majority of these spaces that are not necessary.
Exactly.
So I was like, so let's map that out and understand where we have our stakeholders, where we have support, where are we investing our time, our energy, our resources. So I think design has always been, especially human-centered design, has always
Right.
benefited, I think, the work that I've done. And that was, I think, an early example. And I was just a student. Like I just had probably only done like my first mapping exercise at that point. But I think from there and that experience, I was so energized by that, because I think it allowed me to understand how to put into practice so many things that I had experienced growing up in terms of like the power of civic engagement, as well as the ways in which one can bring a um, a specific like lens or um, area of expertise to see the whole, right? Like my dad's in
Yeah.
epidemiology, right? And so like, and now that's kind of more common term with COVID, unfortunately, but like before it was kind of like, how does that, so like, how does that fit into a whole? My mom in environmental justice, right? Like, how does that fit into a whole? But what I've realized is like, it's the same whole, but we just have to think about ways in which to do so. And I think that sometimes the ways in which you think about design can also contribute to how one thinks about a problem, but most of all, how one arrives at a solution.
Right, 100%. But you got us to the part that a lot of people can't wait to hear about. And that is when you started working on, like, you've worked on so many political races, it's unbelievable. I don't know why you're not running for office, but we'll talk about that on a different day. But walk us through from, I think the first one was Barack Obama's Senate race, I think. Was that the first time that you kind of did anything with politics? So let's see, how do you go from there to Stacey Abrams in 2020?
You're so cute. Yeah, thank you so much. I'll try to be quick. I know. Um, so that happened at my second summer after in undergrad, and then my last summer, I worked for the first female governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm, who was running against, which is interesting, Betsy DeVos's husband at the time. Yeah, so we were,
Don't
yeah.
get me started on Betsy DeVos, people.
I won't. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, just thinking about it. So what it's hard to believe, but what she is, I actually think that he's twice so. So that was like a really big
Right.
twice bad way.
Right.
So that was really beautiful, but not only because of the campaign, but then I also had the opportunity to work on her um, speech writing team and policy writing team. And that was the summer before I graduated from undergrad. And that was just such an empowering experience. And she's wonderful. And she's also the new Secretary of Education under the Biden administration. So that gave me a lot of faith, especially as a woman in Michigan. Like, we don't, I mean, like, what? Like, that never happens.
Yeah.
It's a red state. Like, yeah, it was just incredible. So I think that really gave me some like understanding. That was the first time, like, that's why I think representation really matters, because even though I cared about these things, I never imagined myself in those spaces. So even working with Barack Obama's Senate campaign, it was amazing to do that work, but you also, yeah, of course, he is half Black, and so that was like amazing to see.
Yeah.
But I think the combination of seeing him and then her, so seeing like a woman and a man of color, it just kind of opened my eyes that like maybe things could be shifting. So I think that was helpful. So after I graduated, I lived in Barcelona for a year and worked in urban planning, and that I worked in San Francisco, really working on projects that brought together the city and kind of like issues like New Orleans, but it was working with the city and understanding like how we can design spaces that would help people of marginalized communities. But I felt kind of like my role was like working out 1/32 of an inch. Like, I feel like I was like, I agreed with the mission of the project, but I was just like, I don't know if like I was working like what felt like, or what was often like 16 hours a day doing these tiny little drawings for some like doorknobs for, like a project that had a great mission, but my role specifically, it just didn't feel like, I felt like any architecture student could have come in and made that difference. And there was really no voice and no connection to the project in a real way. So that's when I took time away from architecture. I um, I wish that my Lugano Lusaga were better, but I think that but I am fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. And so I actually took time, and I lived in Guatemala, and I did a project that kind of intertwined. So I was like, I just need to do something different. And I worked on a project that was designing, it was in a village outside of Guatemala City that had at the time the highest orphanage rate of all of Latin America. So you had so many, it was an overwhelming problem of kids who did not have parents. And that's something that a lot of our family members in Uganda face as well. And so the project was both to how do we quickly design new orphanages, and also how do we work with the kids to provide them with Spanish lessons and English lessons, because where we're working, Spanish wasn't even the minority language because they have a local language. So it was just like, it was interesting to work with the village leaders and political leaders to understand, okay, how is this an issue? And one of the issues was like, they didn't have transportation to get to a hospital. The issues of there was no running water. So we designed and created like their first water resource. We helped to design and create their first transportation link to Guatemala City, like things like that. So when I did that, I was like, wow, like I have so much more to learn. Like this was, I want to give more to issues like this, but I don't have the background, I don't have the knowledge yet. So I was like, I think I need to go back to school, which is crazy. Cause I remember when I graduated from prison, I was like, I'm done with school. I threw off my cap. I was like, hey, but no, I was like, I need to ground myself in more understanding if I actually want to like engage in these spaces in ways that can be most valuable and impact the most number of people. So it is at that point when I applied to go to school for urban planning and policy. And that's when I really started to work in politics. So from then I worked as a senior advisor to the mayor of Rio de Janeiro, to the late mayor of San Francisco, Ed Lee. I worked on, before that I worked on both of Barack's other presidential campaigns. A congresswoman in our area, Boston, Ayanna Pressley. I worked on her campaign. I worked
Who's amazing, by the way. She's just the best person ever.
She's my number one mentor, but just like life inspiration. Worked on Elizabeth Warren's campaign as like a director. And the most recently, I worked with Stacey Abrams, who is in Georgia and was working on the primarily, both the presidential race and the Senate races as a strategist. So I was working with her. So it's just, I think that's, so it's just been really empowering just to see so many different people especially people of color, especially young people, especially coming into the forefront and being on campaigns. Because I even will say, like when I was first doing this work, now 17 years ago, the space didn't look like this, and the rooms didn't feel like this, and the people involved, both the people involved on the ground and in leadership, looks very much like your typical kind of like white male, which is okay, but I love that now it's kind of expanded this idea of who can have a voice and who can have power. And so it's been really beautiful working with these groups and just learning. I'm mainly just feel so lucky to learn from them and to understand how I can take nuggets in the back of my mind and try to apply them to anything that I do. And then so I've worked on those, and then but my main gig is I work and instruct at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where I teach on issues of social justice, social impact, to students, but then also, so that's like kind of like half the role, but then I also work with leaders at the local, county, state, and federal level who want to embed a deeper social justice mission to what they do. So like, for example, in January, all the new congressmen and women, and our whole team did an orientation for them. So that's kind of like a yearly thing. So just kind of understanding like folks who want to engage. We really engage with folks that want to run for office and yeah, we just try to provide resources for people that are committed to missions that are purposeful, and that want to make a change in the world and help to provide a platform through either our podcasts, our resources, our convenings, and ensure that they have, the support and resources to do what they want to do to change the world, and not and have a backing and a tribe and a community that surrounds them and lifts them.
Right. Yeah, so for the people that are on this call, I am about to get to the point where you guys can give me your questions and I can ask Tessa over here. Feel free to type in the chat, let me know what you'd like me to ask her. But Tessa, we're getting to the point where, as some people would say, things come full circle. And I feel like this inauguration, things did come full circle for you. I don't know why in my mind, but I feel like what you had put work in for years, you saw manifest itself this last year. I was so surprised when Amanda Gorman was somebody you had taught before, but I was also not surprised. I was just like, if Tessa taught Amanda, she's so a representation in herself. So as we're saying, things come full circle. How do you feel like the presence of you as a Black woman in the spaces of educating the next Amanda Gormans and the next Stacey Abrams and the next Michelle Obamas, right? How is that being of impact? Because I feel like for me, as an educator now, people will say all kinds of things. I'm really good at what I do. I can teach these kids, I have so much information, blah, 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 blah. But for me, the most powerful role I take so seriously, like my life depends on it, is my presence in an educational space as a Black woman. Because those kids will never know that perspective unless I'm in that room. So you walk me through, how are you seeing that impact play itself out?
Well, first of all, thank you for what you do, because I think you are the one doing the most to educate the next generation and being so thoughtful about ways in which we can educate better. So I lean to you, and I bow to you. I want to continue to learn for ways to do this more. But yes, Miss Amanda Gorman. Oh, if anyone doesn't know or hasn't heard, she is an incredible woman who, she's only 22, but she had the opportunity to do many things, one of which has most recently been that she was the poet laureate at the inauguration, which was so powerful and like the work of so many. So she continues to use her voice for power. And what most inspires me about her is that she is such a fighter. So she already graduated. Unfortunately for me, not, but fortunately for her. When I first met her, she still had, and she talks about it very openly, so I feel very comfortable saying that, she still had a speech impediment, a very, very strong speech impediment. And wasn't sure about her place in the world. And if people would accept her, acknowledge her, I mean, she's brilliant in and outside of her poetry. She's just a fantastic and phenomenal and brilliant woman, and often would tap out of doing some of the public speaking. So I think even outside of the fact that it was an inauguration, the fact that all the glitz and glamour, I think if I had seen that video and she had done it in front of two people, I would have still been so proud and cried. I hope even just that piece of the story help gives people faith. I was always, so until I started working in politics, you can ask my whole family, my family, well, one, they're very like full of life and loud, so maybe it's not the best, but I've always been the most quiet. I've always been the most shy. And it wasn't until, I started working in these spaces that I kind of gained that confidence, right? It still gives me a little tingle whenever I have to like present and things like that. So I think she just gave voice to a lot of people. Yes, in terms of, yes, obviously she's like a wonderful Black woman, home of a single mom, and so many things. But like, in addition, I think just to anyone who's ever felt that they were not heard. A lot of the things that she would come to would be about the ways in which she was so silent. So like to the point that Patricia mentioned, she speaks about her experience at Harvard wasn't 100% positive, right? She would always silenced by especially, I mean, you know, people of other genders and races, and wasn't really accepted in the way she's maybe been accepted in media and social media now. So I think she's a really good story in resilience and like just grounding yourself in your purpose and your passion, and people will not agree. You know, people will not agree. If you are so passionate about something that means to you, there are going to be people that don't. I mean, and she's had negative back. She's had so much positive. I mean, oh my gosh, it's been like so cool to witness. But of course, there are going to be people that have the opposite, right? Like she had to, that have, you know, people that have come against her family or things like that. So I think it's just a good lesson, and what a powerful woman. What I hope to bring to students like her and others, I know for a fact that so many other students I've had the opportunity, I feel the privilege to have worked with, are many Amanda Gormans. You know, there's so many voices. Like I'll like even on Zoom, but especially when things are in person, it's just like I don't understand how you hear the voices of these students and their passion and their brilliance and even just their curiosity, and then sometimes you hear what's going on in the world. You're like, how are these people in power and not these ones? You know. So I think my goal, my mission in life is to find ways to elevate the voices that I feel like can do good. So I think she's a wonderful example. And I know that you, for example, are just as powerful. And so many people on this call, so many people watching. So I hope people find ways to either, you know, support and give love to people in your life that you see have the same potential, and hopefully also you feel that in yourself. Hopefully that you feel like you could be that powerful. You don't have to be on the stage of an inauguration to do that, but I hope that I hope if it gave anything that you have girls everywhere and women everywhere and anyone who's ever felt unseen the power to know that your voice can matter, and that there is a place for you, and there are people that will receive it and that will welcome so long as you're able to power through.
Okay. You're always about all these other people. Tessa, you're the amazing one. I don't know why we're we're gonna ignore that at all. But so some questions are coming in, and I'm gonna read some to you. So Pauline says, how do you navigate spaces that don't look familiar or intimidating?
I love this question, Pauline. Thank you for asking, and Patricia for sharing. I always say, bring your full authentic self. Do not pretend to be someone else or appease another group. I think that gets you into trouble. So when I'm in spaces, and oftentimes, you know, I am in spaces with people who maybe they've never been in a space like someone like me. Maybe I'm in spaces with rooms that are majority men. Maybe I'm in spaces with people who have no relationship to Uganda. I'm in spaces with people who have never met anybody like me, or don't have any friends who come from immigrant families. It's unproductive and ingenuine to be as they are, because I think the goal is for them to see that there are other variations of the truth that you think that you hold. One of my favorite, I think I saw my like Instagram, one of my favorite things to say is, women are the majority globally. People of color are the majority globally. So if you're in these rooms or these spaces of folks who want to dismantle or dismiss, even if that room that you're in feels as though you are, know that you're on their backs. And if you ever have doubt, if you're ever scared or you don't think, know that you have me on this shoulder, you have Patricia on this shoulder, and
Exactly.
so many,
Yeah.
right? Just be your authentic self, tell your story, because I really feel, and I'm not saying this as a, like in a theory. I've seen the change that it can make when you tell people stories, and you help people understand who maybe don't have exposure. When I was working in Georgia for the election, there are people who voted just in November for Trump, but voted for our new senators, Ossoff and Warnock, in January because they really didn't understand and they really didn't know. And so this hearing, and also allowing other people to tell you their stories, and then you tell them their stories, can really be powerful. So sometimes I think it's just, we have to release this idea of like, this person's going to be like this because they look and feel like that, or this is unfamiliar, so they're not going to understand me. I think just stand in your truth. It's okay if your voice shakes or your hands sweat or anything else. We've all been through that, but know that there's a huge ripple effect.
Right.
You are inspiring somebody else to do the same. And maybe that person that you're inspiring is just you. And maybe that person is someone that will never, that is silent at the table and they won't say anything, but it's going to resonate in their mind. And they're going to go back and talk about it to their friend, to their partner. They're going to text about it. And it might not be today or tomorrow, but maybe in 3 years, they see something like, oh, shoot, when Paulina said that, now I get it.
Right.
When Black Lives Matter was so big this summer, I had so many messages come through. Like, now I understand. I never understood before. So just know when it feels like you are just shouting into a void, know that there are people that everyone's at their own pace. So I think it's helpful to just know to meet people where they are. Right. And hopefully they will come around, but never feel deflated if you say something or share something and it doesn't immediately result in action. Know that a shift of the mind and the heart sometimes can take time, and if done meaningfully, then I still always say that just being your true self is the most important. They will understand you, and committing yourself to, as you want to, when you're in these spaces, listen as much as you would want to be listened to, right? So don't just project your story and idea and like, you guys should not do this or that. Model that by listening to others, and then receive and share your story, and that can create the hope that they might listen to you.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm sure Patricia has other tactics that she has.
I don't. I mean, for me, people have heard me talk about this. When people they say the word navigate, I'm always like, that's the root of the problem. Never navigate spaces, because to navigate is to not bring your truest self. To navigate is almost like you're saying you have to switch between personalities to fit in spaces. You should constantly move in your truest self, no matter what. I will say, I say that from a place of privilege because I have had to work on it. And I've heard a mom who's just like, let me tell you, your truest self is going to get you in front of people that you never thought you would ever meet in your entire life. That like Tessa, we talked about this today, remember? And you were asking me a couple questions. I was like, Tessa, just bring your authentic self. It's okay. And I work with such young kids, and the reason why I focus more on them than on older kids is because they still have malleable brains. And I want them, if there's anything that they learn in life, it's that don't change for somebody else. Work on your truest self and exude that in everywhere that you go, because that's how you will learn. That is how you will make mistakes and learn from them. That is how you impact people. That's how you're going to change people, right? You just talked about like your story. People think, the one thing I've learned is people think their stories are irrelevant because nobody has modeled listening. It's always like, but this is what my story says. It's like, no, 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 no. Someone just shared this story. Acknowledge that they just shared something, right? The idea of how do you communicate with another person by, I hear you, and this is what I understand about your story. And despite the fact that mine is this way, I still do respect your narrative. I do respect your perspective. So for me, I agree with you 1,000%. Truest self is invaluable. And in the time that we're living in right now, I mean, I've had privilege or not privilege to navigate America with a very interesting identity, right? The idea that yes, I'm viewed as a Black woman, but I am African, and there is a part of the Black experience that I have no idea about. And so how I navigate that is by always remembering that, guess what, I do have African roots. And at the end of it all, I am an African woman who is Black and who also, you know, navigates spaces in a way of people just see versus knowing, right? So I do agree with that one. You know, just be you. So I have another one. My brother just texted me this one.
Hey,
And
brother.
I know he's watching somewhere. And he says, how do you think where you are now, you have finally found your calling in life?
I missed the first part. If I feel where I am now, I have finally found my calling in life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I do. I think in terms of mission, I feel like I have found my calling. I'm not sure in terms of spaces. So I love this question. Actually, I think about this a lot. So this session is great. So I know that I always want to center myself in ways in which to advance social justice, social impact, and but like in a really, I guess if you could say technical term, to understand how are we reversing or introducing policy that's meaningful, right? So it's also beautiful to just like to shout and to share, but I've always wanted to work in spaces that are able to articulate and really like write new legislation, because I think that's what's missing. So I think the work that I'm doing in terms of like policy writing, like how are we going to introduce things that have been on the hearts and minds and souls of so many people this year, like who's going to actually like, do the work to go, okay, so let's analyze like all the things. Like one of the bills that I'm working on right now is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Oh, I forgot to mention it. Oh, I can't believe I forgot to mention that, because it's one of the things, when you're asking like about my journey, right, what I should have mentioned is probably the most powerful work of my life that I've ever done. I'm going to say this, but it does relate to the question. Your beautiful brother, is that in this last year, I had the opportunity, the deep privilege, to work with John Lewis and his team on his final documentary of his life in the last few months of his life. So if you guys have the opportunity to watch, but a lot of it is about voting rights and how we advance voting rights. And he just has like such a patient and incredible demeanor, and the work that John Lewis has done for decades has been incredible. He was a congressman. He was the youngest person as context, to speak at the March of Washington. And that is the time in which Martin Luther King gave the I Have a Dream speech. So in a lot of the photos, you'll see him in the back, and he was so young. So I say that to hope to inspire people. He was 23 at that time, I believe, but he had done so much other work before as a teenager. And Martin Luther King too, he was 16 when he submitted his first response to an op-ed by handwritten notation, to say that there's an article that you posted, or that you, not posted, that's new language, but an article that you presented in the newspaper that was disheartening to me. So I just want to say, I think that when we think about, the reason why I mentioned that is one of the things that John Lewis mentioned in the conversations that we would have was, I'm never done. And I feel that way too. I think that the mission, I feel very lucky to have found ways in which to incorporate the mission. But for me, I think we need like such an overhaul of like we would, the fact that he was taking calls on this and telling us about times from 60 years ago, like that's a problem. Right? The fact that he was quoting things from then that are still relevant now, I'm like, of course it was so beautiful to hear, because like, what a man. But like, therein lies the issue. Like, we have to have just like much bolder steps. Like this cannot be some small trickling idea. We cannot be in the people mover at an airport. We're all just kind of like going ahead. We have to understand, how are we stopping that motion? How are we reversing it? How are we have to do things to like actively make sure that these things are just, it's just, how do we ensure that? Like, it's, so I think for me, I feel grounded in the mission. I haven't found the perfect way. So I deeply appreciate, I love the accolades, even like working with, working with campaigns has been something that I think is really has been powerful. Like just yesterday, the vote was at 5:30 a.m. in the Senate chamber, where our new Madam Vice President Kamala Harris broke the tie to pass legislation for the COVID bill, right? And the only reason why it was a tie-breaking vote is because of the fact that the Senate was won because of the folks in Georgia.
Right.
So those kind of things are like really uplifting and helpful. And I think that the work that I'm doing at the Kaneene School, I love it so much, and I hope that it makes change. But I haven't found the perfect way in which to know how to perfectly make change. I think that the exposure has been super helpful to understand the way that money and politics play a role, to have experienced so deeply the power of community and grassroots organizing and energizing and mobilizing. But I'm trying to still think of a way to like put that all together and understand what is the best use. Because kind of like what Patricia was saying, I was like, okay, I was trying to figure out like, okay, so we've had this opportunity to be in these spaces and sometimes these schools. So like, how do we use that for the greatest good? How do we make sure that what we're doing? So I think in mission, I feel grounded. I feel as though I have not yet lived up to the power and the beauty and the love of my ancestors and the fight of them, because I want to find deeper ways and better ways and more in-depth ways to make sure that I contribute to something that structurally changes the soul of this nation in a way that can sustain for a long time. And maybe that could be, and whether that's at the community level or the federal level, I always just want to think about like, I was thinking about like, if you were here, what would you do or say? So especially having access to some of these spaces and people, I'm forever inviting critique and ideas from all of you guys and others of ways in which to make sure that it's not just small change, but change that can make real impact on actual people and families right now, but then also just like change the way that we think about all these things forward, and our great grandkids get to inhabit a world that is more just.
Right. Okay, I have a very interesting one. Oh geez.
Oh no.
I don't know why I always get these when it's like an immigrant. Usually parents will text me these. It's a mom who says, um, what did you oh hold on. I feel like this is targeted towards me, but we'll see how it goes. She goes, what did you no your parents say or do to inspire you to take advantage of all opportunities that came to you, whether it's education or social capital or wealth building, in your time in the United States?
Oh, that's easy. You made it seem like it was going to be something so dramatic.
It's like, whoa, okay.
No, no, I think that's beautiful. We talked about a little bit. So who's the person who asked the question?
It's one of I don't know if she wants her name put out there, but she's a mom too.
No,
I
no,
know she has two girls
no.
that are
I love this question. So thank you for who asked it. I hope you're still listening. So we talked a little bit. I'm not sure if you were there at the beginning. Patricia asked a great question about the way in which I was raised and some of the things that my parents put into place as they were here as immigrants. And they always say, like, we lived on beans and rice. But it was, and we read books and we cut coupons and we learned and we played and made up our own games and we made our own jacks, the game in Uganda. We just, and we learned, we had no idea that this was like not what other kids were doing. And we were able to, and we went to so many of the events that my parents had curated or had discovered that were curated on campus because we lived right next to a campus. So we would go to visit the farm, or we would go to sporting events, or we'd go to the free theater, or we would do so many things of that nature to understand. My dad also had an easel where he would like teach us all these things about, he would map out the areas of Uganda, and we would sing the alphabet and the national anthem, and I don't know, just create a space that was really focused on learning. He had a system that was about, if you ever wanted to read a book, or there was a book that interested you, then he would purchase that for you and put the exact price in your savings account for college or whatever you wanted to do later in life. And it was never requirement that you had to go to college, but we all ended up doing so. So I think that it was like coming from immigrant parents, just they knew the power of community and joy and exposure. So many things that they weren't exposed to in Uganda, I think that fueled them. And we've had so many conversations about this. My brother just had a baby last year. And so we've had so many conversations about the way in which, and he lives in New York City, that he wants to replicate the type of life and the exposure that our parents gave to us. So we talk about this a lot. So this is really close to my heart. I really love the question because I think it's really important that we have to understand, like, how are we raising the next generation? So we've spoken extensively, and over the summer and the holidays, we literally had like spread out so many photos and all of our old art and letters and all the things that we did as kids, that some of which I didn't even remember, but then when you see it, it's so powerful. So I think parenting is the first form of education, and the ways that we can understand, first appreciate the ways our parents brought us up to bring us together to talk about this right now. Is really beautiful. And then the ways in which, whether we are parents ourselves or have, other kids in our lives, then I think I think it's a really good question. And coming from parents of immigrants only has given me that lens, especially in the policy work that I do. So much of the work that I do is around immigration. A lot of the work that I had done was around the Muslim ban, has been around, things around Black Lives Matter, and even spaces in which I have not been a part of physically myself, but understanding like how that also resonates with the the experience that I've had. So I think just my parents were always very open about all of these issues and talking about them, and making sure that we knew who we were, and no matter what we had, we would always, like every Friday, we would go before we would have our Friday dinner. Sometimes they would treat us to like the $2.99 large pizza at Pizza Hut, whatever. We would go and we would go to Soup Kitchen to serve other families. So I
Right.
think education happens in a lot of different forms, and being raised by immigrant parents allowed me to not just what might now seem as privilege. It was never in the form, and even this year, in my mom's absence, we still did the same things where
Right.
we went to the store even with COVID. She would always go and buy groceries for a number of families in the community. My sister and I, we took the same list that she had,
Mhm.
and we delivered all of those, and we did that before that we had our Thanksgiving. So I think that's a form of education. And then when you with the families, this year we couldn't really, usually it's fun to talk to them and think of other ways to help. With COVID, it was more of a drop off. But I think coming from immigrant families is there's I everything that I do, all the ways in which I march into a room or design and think about policy is always with that in my back, because it's my only friend and it's my most powerful.
Mhm.
And I couldn't think of a better way in which to have a humanitarian lens in the world. So
Yeah.
I love that question, and I'll always there's nothing else that could move or drive me, because it's all I know. It's what I
Yeah.
love. And there are no two people in this world that I respect more than my parents, who both just happen to be immigrants. So thank you so much.
Right.
Um,
I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. I'm not even gonna. I can't add to that. I really can't. Because my dad and my mom will probably listen to this. So they're gonna judge a million times. But all I could say is for me, out of everything you said, I second. Um, but the thing that I think of and I hope every day that I am to my kids is as present and in the moment as both my parents are. I mean, I tell people this, and like Tessa's met my dad, so she knows what I'm talking about. When I was at Cornell, from Boston to Cornell is like 6.5 hours drive. And this is on good roads. So in Uganda, it would be like 35 something hours on our very beautiful meandering roads. Okay. But um, the one thing that I never took for granted was my dad and mom moved me in and out every semester for 5 years, which means they drove up when I was going and came and picked me up. And for me, I was like, there's a lot of things that people can have in life, but that is one thing that I can't take for granted because I know not everyone has that. So I would say I hope I'm as present and in the moment for my kids as my parents were. I think that's one of the big ones. And now that I see my friends, you said like brother having a kid, like I have a lot of friends who are now getting into that point of becoming mothers and fathers, and I they always turn to me as a person to speak on that like first birthday of the kid. And I'm like, I'm not gonna say anything unusual except the fact that don't forget the greatest privilege God can give you is to be a parent. So don't throw it out the window. Do it well, and you only get one chance to do it. Okay, so I have one from Vivian, and Vivian says, "What's the greatest piece of advice you have been given?" And to follow up on that, I'll just give you both at the same time. And the half follow-up was, what would you tell your younger self that you know now?
I love that. Thank you, Vivian, for the question. I think what I would tell my younger self is to be brave and to speak up. There's so many times when we witness examples, even tiny examples, from when you're in the sandbox to an elementary school or middle school or high school, where you see people being bullied or you see people being treated poorly. And I was really shy when I was little. So I wish what I could have done or should have done could have been to find ways in those spaces to just shed light, or at least to make sure that I'm never in a space in which somebody else feels uncomfortable or unsafe or unheard or unseen. So I think that that's something that I would tell my younger self, that it's okay to do that. And I tell my current self that, and I try to live by that. A piece of advice. Um, I think my favorite advice that I've ever received is listen more than you speak. This is not a good example because it's supposed to be like with us, so I wish
I know, right? It's because we're like digging, we're digging for information right now.
Yeah. So one of the quotes that I'll paraphrase is I've never learned anything by talking. I've learned everything I know by listening and learning. And that just like resonated to my soul. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't speak, but it means like the learning happens in those moments. And I guess the second piece of advice, or just a thinking that I think drives my soul and what I do, is one that says, we drink from wells we did not dig, and we can never pay it back, but we can always pay it forward. So just always remembering that, like those two things, like we have so much listening to do and learning to do, and know that everything that we have in this life is because somebody else fought for it or spoke up for it or didn't tolerate it or loved for it or prayed for it. So it's a good reminder, and sometimes that helps me be a little more brave to know there was someone else that might have had hesitations too, or didn't know what was going to happen. So thank you for those questions. Yeah, so that I think I would tell my both my younger self and my current self to be more brave and try to live my life by those creeds and see the ways in which that I can make a difference in that way.
Yeah. And I hope Dad is right in the quote about the wells, because that was a good one. I'm going to rewatch this and I'm going to write that down because that was powerful right there. So, the podcast and the Facebook live series is called Success versus Greatness.
Yes.
I hope you have some idea of what these two words mean to you, because this is a time where I would want you to share with us, when you think of success, when you think of greatness, what comes to mind? And do you think they're the same thing, or do you think they're different?
Thank you so much. I think they're different in the way that society frames them. Because oftentimes I feel as though success has the connotation of money. Greatness has the power to suggest impact. So I love this idea of the verses, and I would hope anything that I try to do, I hope would always be on the side of greatness.
Yeah.
Because I think what greatness is you can be great to so many. But you can also be, the reason why I say that is because I think that you can be successful without being great, in the sense of financial, right? You could be a millionaire, a billionaire. They said the next trillionaire might happen next year. But you could do that on the backs of so many, and without the vision and the passion and the focus on what you want to do to help and to change. And so I think I would only feel comfortable being successful if I've first been an emblem of greatness. And I think greatness happens in so many of the small spaces, right? I think greatness happens in the in 2-year-olds who want to share their meal with you. It happens in people who extend their courtesy to folks like your dad. It happens to people that want to study and learn about other people to make sure that they can do something that's more powerful. It happens that mentor, that those who preach, that those who create spaces like these, that those who support others and navigate for others, and our friends and a good family member. I was like, that's the greatness, right? Especially in this time where we're pretty isolated because of COVID. Like to be great, like that happens like most of those things only you will know, right? So I think the greatness, I think success is the public and greatness is the private in some way. It's like to be great, like I know you're great because of the ways in which we've interacted and how loving you are. And you don't have to be in a billboard for me to understand that you're great.
Yeah.
That makes me know that you're so much greater than a million other people.
Right.
So I think greatness is defined and dictated by like the character of your soul and like the ways in which you are able to make this life more than yourself.
Right.
Success oftentimes for me has the connotation, greatness has the connotation of selflessness. Success can sometimes feel like selfishness. If understood incorrectly.
Right.
So it can often be about an individual, right? Of having an education or money, and then there is a level of what folks might think of as success as defined by society. Whereas greatness has no bounds or no barriers. The greatest people are my great grandparents, right? And all they've ever done is just give every single person they've ever known and touched love and hugs and support. And to me, that's far more impressive and understanding and grace and forgiveness, right? Like those, to me, like those are the qualities that make somebody so great. And if by chance, because there's so many times like it is no connection. It's not a magnetism that good people encounter success. It's not binary in that way. It doesn't. One of my favorite things, I was like, opportunity is equally distributed. Like talent is equally distributed. Opportunity is not. And it's opportunity that allows this narrative of like capitalism success to be true. The best entrepreneurs, some of the most amazing people are my aunts and my cousins on my dad's side who have never had the opportunity to fulfill success the way that we have, right? They're the best business owners. They are the most caring people. They are great. And I think they're successful, but they're not.
Right.
So when we are investing in them and doing things, so I think that maybe I think one should achieve for greatness and invite success. But when one has success, I think the power is to understand that how do I allow or inspire other people to be great? And how can I spread my success to as many people as possible?
As I can,
because until you do that, then I think then the success in the silo isn't inspiring. I think that it's only powerful when we find ways to make sure that our collective successes have the opportunity to make an impact on as many people as possible.
Yeah. And she just closes it so nicely. Oh, I can't even add anything to that. It was just, Tessa, honestly, thank you for taking the time. Even if we took 8 months to plan this, we got there when we got there. So I'm going to say goodbye to the people on Facebook Live, but if you could stick around, the people in the call, whoever would like to say hi, check in, actually talk to Tessa. I usually leave about 20 minutes for that to happen. And you can say hi to my dad, he's somewhere on this call. But everyone on Facebook, thank you for tuning in. And also, this is the beautiful Tessa. I'm so glad I got to.
So thank you to Patricia, thank you to Rebecca, to Anthony, to Sarah, to Pauline, to Babe, to the whole team. So.
Right, thank you. So I'm just gonna say bye to the people on Facebook. We appreciate you all the time. And as we say at Team EIE, don't forget to make the most of what you got.